I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Author Clive Thompson was a speaker here last fall and part of the Fort Collins Reads project. His presentation was based on his book, Smarter Than You Think, How Technology is Changing Our Minds for the Better. And his book is actually a beautifully written essay that eloquently rebuts the position by Nick Carr and other people that the internet and other digital technologies are making us less intelligent and less able to concentrate. So he rebuts that position. He rebuts the idea that Google's making us stupid. So that's his position. And again, in his book, it's a beautifully written book. And I first read his book as columns about new technologies in Wired. My first exposure to Clive Thompson was in Wired magazine. It's kind of required reading in our house. We fight over copies when they arrive. He's also a contributor on technology to the New York Times magazine, and he was a pioneering blogger at his site Collision Detection. So we're pleased to welcome Clive back to Fort Collins via teleconference, along with two distinguished colleagues. I got my colleagues over here at the table. Dawn Pascal, Assistant Dean of Morgan Library, and next to Dawn is Jamie Switzer. She's a professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Communication. So Clive requested that I asked him, I said, would you give us a presentation? He said, I'd really like just to have a conversation. I'd just like to talk. So let's have a conversation. So we set this up where we'll be able to chat with him. And so momentarily we'll be talking with Clive. So it's about 4:30 p.m. in New York on Friday afternoon. And we're using the software we're using is something called Blue Jeans, something they prefer to use over in Morgan Library. And now here's Clive. Live from New York, here's Clive Thompson. Hello, Clive. Welcome to FutureVisions Symposium 2020. It's great to have you here with us.
It's good to be here.
We just have a few questions for you. We want to talk to you about these issues that you've raised in your book, Smarter Than You Think. And I'm joined here by Jamie Switzer on my right, and Dawn's over here on my far right. And you can see us okay, can't you?
Yep.
Okay.
I can see you guys. I can see the three of you. I can't see the audience.
Okay. Yeah, they're all here. They're watching. So our first question is going to be from Dawn. So Dawn, take it away.
All right. Greetings, Clive. So as you know, currently there is disagreement on whether the internet and the digital environment are having a positive or negative effect on our brains. The negative effect, for example, being that multiple distractions are affecting our ability to focus. How do you see this debate changing over the next 5 years and why?
Sure. Well, I mean, the point about distractions is probably, I think, the most mature part of our grappling with the effects of technology on the way we think, because it's sort of, I think it's gone through the most useful scrutiny. I mean, if you were to go back about, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 years, there was, and it's actually kind of funny to actually go back 10 years. It's very funny to go back and read news coverage of computers, because computers were these multitasking devices that could let you do several things at once. You could you do your email, you could do web surfing, you could instant message at the same time. And there was this sense in the early days of the internet that that the ability to multitask was sort of bringing out your intellectual best, like that we were sort of intellectually on fire when we were doing like 9 things at once. And it was largely through the work of a few intellectuals that really questioned this. Particularly, I think Nicholas Carr's The Shallows did a really good job of debunking, the idea that multitasking was good for our thinking, because the evidence was becoming increasingly clear in scientific work and kind of in everyday life that if you're constantly darting around from one thing to another, then you were really going to be able to focus on nothing at all. And we know, it's pretty incontrovertible evidence that, if you're flipping around from one thing to another while you're reading or while you're trying to pay attention to a conversation, you will sort of retain none of it. Distraction significantly corrodes your intelligence. Now, so that idea started seeping into I think that the public consciousness, a couple of years ago, and at the same time as social networks were rising. in their use in everyday life, right? So now you had these and the thing about social networks is, for all the good things that they give us in terms of new ways to think socially, to broadcast ideas, to engage in dialectic, to pay attention to what other people are thinking and doing in ways we couldn't before. For all those good things, they are all they're all run by large for-profit companies whose business model is exclusively, most of them anyway, selling advertising. And so that means, whatever your business model is, selling ads, and you're a technology company, that means that you only make money when someone is staring at your application, right? And so that means you want them never to do anything but stare at your application. And that means if they're doing something else, like reading a newspaper or talking to a friend or whatnot, you have to try and figure out how to convince them to stop doing that and look at the app so they can make money off ads. And so the business model is really, in many respects, the brutal thing to blame here, because Facebook, Twitter, these guys have tens of billions of dollars to figure out how to distract you all day long. And if you gave me a few $1 billion and said, can you distract people? I'd probably be very, very good at it. Actually, you can really scale up your distractions. So at the same time as I think we're in the last sort of 6 years, there's been this rising sense that distraction is corrosive to our thinking. There's been the rise of these social networks that we find really compelling for, I think, completely valid reasons, but whose business models are disastrous to our peace of mind for that reason. So where does that leave us now, and where over the next 5 years? Well, I think a couple things are happening. One is that you're seeing people really connecting the dots on this now. I mean, certainly amongst the kind of early adopter folks that really dive into technology and use it a lot. Most of them have sort of gone past this curve of sort of being very infatuated, with sort of, constantly checking social media and being very engaged, to realizing, oh my God, I'm getting nothing done, and this is terrible for my productivity, it's terrible for my life, and they're all tailing off. So you see them posting, these blog posts or Facebook posts about how they've, a screenshot of them turning off all the alerts on every single app on their phone, so they never get into those stupid beeps and boops and whatnot. And you also see in, even at the level of educators in schools. I mean, I've been to a lot of elementary and secondary schools, and you find a lot of everything from librarians to teachers that are doing a sort of encouraging their kids to think about the distraction environment, saying, well, okay, look, these tools might be useful for learning things, for communicating, but they're constantly trying to get you to look at them, and so you need to practice a fair amount of mindfulness in everyday life. You have to learn to pay attention to where your attention is going, because you cannot trust a $10 billion corporation whose business model is distracting you to stop doing that. The only solution is within yourself. Now, the upside here is that most of the people that sort of take seriously this issue of distraction and realize that they're going to have to assert some mental self-control over this, find that it's actually not that hard to do so. In fact, actually, I was just reading a very nice essay by Hugh McGuire, a guy I know. I think he's up in Montreal, and he runs sort of an ebook company, and he'd noticed that in the last year he'd only read 4 books. And he runs an ebook company. He only read 4 books last year. And so he wrote this essay basically sort of tracing how he had sort of overindulged in social media, to the point, having his phone in bed and stuff like that when he should have been reading a book to calm down at night. And realizing this was that this was leading him down a terrible path, and he didn't like his life. And he decided, okay, I'm going to set some rules of engagement for these things, when to not look at them. And he successfully sort of repaired his attention span. Even myself, I think I hit this curve probably earlier than many, because I was a bit of an early adopter with this stuff. So I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when I started deciding that I really enjoyed the conversational quality of this very public thinking modes, whether it was Twitter, whether it was Facebook, whether it was Instagram, whatever. I really liked that stuff. But, definitely it was more interesting, more compelling than getting my work done. And so I started to set my own rules, including, realizing that these are fun environments to be in, but you don't want to be in them all day long. In the same way that I'm not going to get much work done if I take my laptop and go to the middle of a raging party and try and get work done. It's not going to happen, right? And that's what social media is. So I started, using it like in discrete times during the day and going offline entirely on the weekends to sort of enjoy the different types of thinking that occur when you're not connected at all, when you're just going for a long walk, when you're reading a book for a long time. And this has become a real thing. Like you see people writing and talking about digital Sabbaths, where they say like, I need to step away from this stuff for definite times of the week. It's a way of people are imposing structure on their schedules so that they can reclaim some control. So I'm actually fairly, in one respect, I'm fairly optimistic about the shift in register that's happened in our thinking, and the way even we're teaching young people about the pros and cons of these technologies. And in fact, I've seen it's very interesting if you've been watching the coverage of the Apple Watch. So, really almost everyone that's tried it out has been like, this is an absolute catastrophe of crazy distractions and alerts on my wrist. Like once again, another large company is coming along and trying to get us to, stop doing what we're doing and pay attention to more alerts that most of which we probably don't need to pay attention to. And every single piece that's been written about it is someone being, this thing was driving me nuts until I went in and manually disabused every single alert, at which point in time I began to realize it might be useful for one or two things. So I think we've gone through a period of infatuation, and we're moving into a more mature phase that I find hopeful.
Okay, our next question is about that topic. So here's a question from Jamie.
Yeah, great seg, and welcome and thank you. As you mentioned, the Apple Watch drops today, and based on early reviews, there's this promise of transforming how people use digital devices on a 24/7 basis. A lot of similar talk about Google Glass, but then in beta it faced a lot of adverse reactions, particularly due to privacy concerns and fights in San Francisco bars, I believe. So what do you see for the future of wearable devices?
Okay, well, I know a little bit about this because I actually bought a pair of Google Glass and wore it every day for 3 months 2 years ago for a story for the New York Times Magazine. My reaction to it was that it was in one sense it was sort of fun. I mean, it was just as a gadget, it's kind of interesting to see if they can put a computer on your head. First off, you sort of look like an idiot, with it, which is a problem. Well, not to everyone. I would get on the subway and young people would go like, "Oh my God, dude, that looks fantastic." I got a lot of thumbs up from young people. But by and large, you look like a real idiot with that thing on your head. And the bigger problem is that, and this is really, it's kind of interesting. I actually did some research for my book into the prehistory of wearable computers, because there were these people that started experimenting with head-mounted computers back in the 1990s when they were so huge it was like wearing a helmet with a big, baseball-sized thing. You really look, straightforwardly bonkers. But these people, a few of them actually figured out how to use it in a way that was that I found sort of compelling, the way they described it. They were using it not to surf the internet and not to sort of constantly be looking at, feeds of Twitter. They didn't have Twitter. They really used it as almost a note-taking device, a way of observing what was happening when they were in conversations, when someone said something interesting, writing it down. They were almost like diarists, like some sort of cyborg, Samuel Pepys from the 18th century. And they would use it to sort of augment their recall in a way that I found really interesting. And crucially, this is really interesting, none of those wearables back then had a camera on them, because they found that whenever you put a camera on it pointing outwards, people just freaked out. They didn't like it. It was very unsettling. Well, lo and behold, the Google Glass comes out, and it's got a camera pointing outside permanently. And what I discovered in wearing it is that this just completely breaks the social contract, right? Because there's something creepy about someone forcing you to be on camera all the time. When we pull out, a smartphone to take a picture, or when we, take a digital camera, take a picture, it's clear what we're doing. There is a social contract being said that I am now taking a picture, right? You can sort of, hold yourself accordingly. You can walk out, whatever. But if someone permanently has a camera pointing out of their head, that's freaky. And what started happening was I realized as I was wearing it that I was so unsettled by the fact that I had a camera pointing at people that I would get on the subway and in New York where I am, and I would not meet people's eye gaze. I would look at the ground because I was worried that they were thinking that I was, videotaping them. And the problem is, of course, that if there's anything creepier than a guy with a computer on his face, it's a guy with a computer on his face that refuses to make eye contact with you, right? So it was just creepiness compounded on creepiness. There was a secondary problem that and this is something my wife pointed. My wife is actually really she's really technology positive. She's a heavy Twitter user. She really likes stuff. So she was kind of enthusiastic at first about me getting Google Glass, but as soon as I started wearing them around the house, she was completely unsettled by them. And she pointed out something very smart, which is that the screen, which was this little screen that was right in your eye that I'm looking at, I can see a little glowing screen. It's a secret screen. No one else can see what I'm looking at. And this is unsettling to people because it turns out that most of the devices we use in our everyday lives are only semi-private, right? If you have a laptop and you're working on it, it's not, out of a sense of my respect for your privacy, I will not peer over your shoulder. But what you're looking at is not secret. Someone else can see it, if they want to. Even with a phone, in fact, actually, phones are surprisingly social. A couple of researchers recently did a study where they looked at people using Google on their phones, and they discovered that 60% of the time people were Googling with someone else, right? Like there were just several people clustered around a phone looking at the results and talking about it, right? So even phones are surprisingly social. We use them privately, but someone else can see what's going on. It's not a secret. And frequently we show people they're conversational objects, right? Not so with Google Glass. The screen is just for me and me alone. So I'd be having a conversation with someone and I tilt my head in a way that would activate the screen. I'm not intending to look at it, but this screen flares up and everyone I'm talking to is like, well, what's Clive looking at now? The news, Angry Birds, Facebook, none of the above, but other people can't tell. So there was something fundamentally wrong, it turns out, about making entirely private media experiences in public. Now, so you bring us to the Apple Watch, and this becomes an interesting question. It's not a private device in that sense. I can see kind of what's on your watch, and I can see that you're looking at it. So I think in one sense it's not going to suffer that sort of social problem of secrecy. I think the bigger problem they've got is that in one sense, a watch is a nice ergonomic place to put a screen, because we have this 150-year-old gesture of looking at your watch that's a well-worn ergonomic gesture. Unfortunately, it's also an ergonomic gesture that carries a semantic weight already. It basically says, I'm running low on time. Can you speed this up? Whenever you look at your watch. So if people are out there socially looking at their watch all the time, it's just going to be. Maybe we'll change the way we understand that gesture. But right now, my sense is that it's going to be a lot of people looking like they're really, really, eager to get away, even if they're using their phone for a perfectly social thing. So in one sense, so this is a way of saying, these are the new devices that are coming along. These are some of the problems with them. But if you wanted to ask me the question of where is wearable computing headed, in one sense, it's already completely here. Everyone in this room, or most of you probably are already wearing a computer. You've got a computer in your pocket. You're wearing it. It's there. We already have wearable computers, and it turns out, that is a quite useful and good thing in most cases. Again, if you sort of impose some self-control and don't pull it out every time you're talking to your children or your parents, it's actually an incredibly useful thing to be able to communicate on a global scale, on the go. So wearable computing is already here. I think the thing that's going to get more interesting, in the 5 to 10 year scale is that, computation is getting cheaper and cheaper and smaller to weave into all sorts of things that we don't really think of computers right now, whether that's, little chips that you can, things like thermostats, like, the Nest thermostat, all these smart thermostats. Well, they're in one sense they're great because, they can imbue a lot more intelligence the way we use energy. They have the potential to dramatically decrease the amount of energy we use. So when you add intelligence to objects around us, whether that's our shirts or our jackets or our thermostats or our cars, you can get them to do some potentially fantastic things. It also opens up the exact same problems we have with mobile phones, which is that, it can become, left to the hands of the free market. It's a total privacy nightmare, because what happens is, companies like Google start saying, well, we're just going to gather all this data of, what's happening in the heating in your house. Oh, and by the way, the Nest thermostat can detect whether or not you're standing in the room or not. So that data is going off to Google too. I actually got a Nest thermostat. Someone gave me one as a gift, and I was literally opening it up to put it on my wall when I discovered the news that it reports whether or not you're standing in your room, and I just closed the box again, and now it's sitting on a shelf. There's no way I'm putting that thing on my wall. I'm enough of a nerd that I could probably build my own smart thermostat that would report to me, that would be owned and controlled by me and not by a multinational corporation. So the upshot of it is, we are going to actually see a lot more computation woven into the world around us in ways that we don't think of as computers. And there are some really terrific things that could come out of that, right? The energy stuff, like a self-driving car is basically just a computer with wheels. It has the potential to dramatically decrease the way we use gasoline, the way we use cars, our carbon footprint, and even the ownership of cars. So there's some really terrific things here, but they're always, every time you introduce computation into an object, you begin to introduce surveillance, an agency. And, there are ways to, regulate this stuff appropriately, none of which Congress is currently looking at, right? The EU is way ahead of us on this. Even Canada's ahead of us on this. If you had a decent regulatory apparatus, I think some of the stuff could be quite a lot of fun. But I don't necessarily trust that the downsides will be minimized.
Okay, Clive, we have time for one more question, and that is, I'd like to refer to computer scientist Doug Engelbart. His dream that technology would become a powerful tool for augmenting human intelligence. So what do you see as the future of this augmentation in the next 5 to 10 years? Is the singularity of melding machine and human intelligence getting closer?
Well, the singularity of machine and intelligence has already been here, and it's been here for a couple thousand years. There's a sort of philosophical theory that emerged in the late 80s or the late 90s, known as the extended mind hypothesis by Andy Clark, terrific philosopher. And he basically pointed out that humans have been outsourcing and using the environment around us to think for an enormously long time, ranging from, writing as a way to externalize our thought, which unbelievably unsettled Socrates, who regarded it as the death of memory and dialectic. And even other people. We use other people to think a lot. Like, this is called transactive memory. I store a lot of my memories in the people around me. My wife and I, we know each other really well, and we delegate things to remember. This is why you get those arguments among partners. How come you can never remember where the socks are? How come you can never remember, the bank account number? That's because they are allocating their memory. Our brains are frankly, in many respects, terrible at dealing with details. So whenever we can, we're very good at dealing with meaning and making meaning out of things. That's the genius of human intelligence. We're terrible with details and managing details. So whenever we can find a device or a person or a scrap of paper or a supercomputer or a pencil to help us out with that, we will use that. So we have been cyborgs for a very, very, very long time. And in many respects, one of the things that I think I discovered in researching my book is that what's happening now is a change not in direction but in really just degree. So I think that we are going to move forward as cyborgs because we've been cyborgs. This is why we've built this often fantastic, frequently maddening civilization, right? But if you wanted to ask me what things I think are going to increase as we go on, I think the one thing that has been, I think, unexpected by Engelbart, because when Engelbart and all these guys were writing about computers back in the 60s and 70s, they were obsessed with the idea of access to information, right? The idea that the goal was really to be able to sort of almost get the library on tap so that you could always find access to questions and you could sort of write things down in a personal, a diary and get them back. But it turned out that what the internet has been and these tools have been primarily and enormously useful for is access to each other, right? Like, people really enjoy the act of externalizing their thinking and seeing what other people think about it. That's what tweeting, that's what email, that's what blogging, that's what Facebook, that's what Snapchat and Instagram and everything is all about. It's about thinking in public or in quasi-public along with other people, getting ideas from other people. Clay Shirky, the technology thinker, once said, this is a brilliant way of putting it, we frequently we always overestimate the value of access to to information and underestimate the value of access to each other. And so I think that what we're really going to see is that the technologies that succeed in the future are going to be ones that allow us to interact with each other in productive, delightful, creative ways, again, frequently maddening or even offensive ways. And it's going to be up to us to figure out how to minimize the maddening and offensive stuff to maximize the creative stuff. But the future of technology and thought is really about the future of how to knit together and allow people these abilities to think in concert with other folks and in different medias and modes. That to me is where I think whenever if the Apple Watch is to do anything successful, that is one of the things I think that it is going to have to try to do, because we are extremely social thinkers. We are extremely you guys are all in a room together. Why are we here in a room together? Well, I'm not in a room with you, but we're basically here in a room together. That's because thinking happens in these very social ways. That's why universities exist, lectures exist, temples of worship. So to me, actually, the ability to create new social architectures of participation for joint thinking is really one of the big things we'll see going forward with technology and thought.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on. Our time is up. I wish we could talk to you for another hour easily. We have about 6 more questions, but this has been a delightful conversation. And thank you so much for sharing some of your time on a Friday afternoon with us. So
I'm glad to be here. I hope the rest of the event goes well.
Okay.
I can see you all now. Take care.